Mr. Tony Cragg. It's a great pleasure and honor to have you in Istanbul for your sculpture exhibition at Dirimart Dolapdere'de. As someone who has been following your work for many years, I thank for you this opportunity to interview us. We also extend our gratitude to entire Dirimart team for providing us with the opportunity to view the works of one of the most important figures in contemporary sculpture. What kind of dialogue do you hope to establish with Istanbul and Turkish audience through this exhibition? Actually, you have sculptures in many important Turkish collections.
Well, you know, my, if you like, relationship to Turkey started some years ago, I think 15 years ago, where I came here for the very first time with a gallerist from Sweden, and I was surprised how enthusiastic people were, especially about sculpture. And I don't know why it's here so interesting, but it's one of the main spaces where I think where people show real enthusiasm for the work. And so over the 15 years, it's been kind of a job that I've taken for myself to actually engage everybody in a dialogue. So you see that my work moves on over the years. And so people can see, kind of looking over my shoulder through exhibitions like this, see what things I come up with. I mean, for me, to be honest, it's a privilege to stand in my studio. I've been doing this for 55 years. So stand in the studio and have the adventure of finding new forms. And so I feel, you know, what I really want to do is that other people can participate in that experience. And Turkey is a very good place for that.
What was the idea and concept that shaped the concept of the sculpture exhibition? What framework did you establish when creating this selection for Dirimart?
Well, again, it's in a sense, you know, I exhibited here in the Museum of Modern Art, and I've done a few other exhibitions. And really it's taking the opportunity to just advance that dialogue, that discourse. Some of the work goes back to work that I've been making for several years. It's kind of developing itself over the years. And then at other times, I've also started making completely new work in the last 4 or 5 years. So it's a completely new adventure for me. And so I'm very happy to be here to show a public that work, yes, yeah.
The increasingly abstract forms in the exhibition demonstrate a greater focus on the material. What was this transformation like for you?
Do you know, I'm not really sure when you use terms like abstract, I'm not really sure what they mean. I mean, I know that historically, one says abstract when one doesn't mean figurative. So, but that's, in a sense, it's too negative. You know, in my case, I've never been interested in making something that already exists, be it a human being, a horse or something, and making it in another material, a person out of bronze or whatever it is, a flower out of, it just doesn't interest me. So what I have discovered is when I work with materials, very much in the same way I make drawings, you experience something, you experience change of form, you experience change of silhouette, you experience a change of texture and materials, and every time with this change, all of the time, one is having in a sort of a train of thought, a flow of thought and a flow of emotion at the same time. And this is really what drives me to make, it's not so much the end product. The end product's important, but the fact of the matter is that I just start my activity very often have no idea where it's going to end up, and sometimes I'm very surprised.
How does working with different materials like bronze, wood, steel and stone influence your way of thinking and your sculptural practice?
Materials I've tended to use, with possibly the exception of stone, but even then the stone is, let's say, very industrially formatted. You know, it comes out of a stone yard where it's in blocks, something like that. But the materials that really interest me are the materials that we use to make the world around us. It's bronze, it's metals, it's steel, it's plywood, it's glass, It's lots of plaster. These are all materials that don't exist in nature. So I'm just using things that we usually make a very boring and very repetitive reality with to make something which is made for a different reason and maybe more complex, arrive at a more complex form and more complex meaning.
How has the layering technique you developed in 1970s evolved today?
Well, layering technique for me has been really very valuable because, first of all, one of the things I was interested in as a little boy was geology. And I even thought for a long time when I was in school to become a geologist. And I love to be, it doesn't matter where I am, and especially interesting here in Istanbul, I like to know what's underneath me. When you see a landscape, the landscape is the result of all the material that's formed it, that's forming it. If it's a jagged, it's a very hard stone, maybe very fresh, been pushed out of the ocean, and some other forms are smooth, they've been run through water. So everything, I find every form, even us, the outer result is actually from the inside of us. So a lot of the work I'm making actually starts in some way or another from the inside. And so the layering up was a very automatic thing. I mean, I made stacks as a kind of gesture against minimalism in the early 60s, 70s. I made stacks that would just look like blocks of geometric blocks, but because of the material they were made of, it was impossible for them to be very precise and very mechanically looking. But it looked like the cross-section of a landscape. It looked like a cliff surface. And later on I made work that was just collecting circular objects, circular wheels and cogs and wheels and even tubes, and piling them up on top of each other to make very straight, because when you pile something up it has to become diminutive. And so in a sense the material and the form dictated themselves. So this is really what was kind of the basis of that. But as I said, I've been doing it for a long time, so of course the way to stack things, the geometries of those stacks, the way they work in space have become more complicated than I anticipated. And I think that's the great thing, is that in a sense they get to a point where they stop being geometric, they become more organic, they become more emotional. Going back a little bit to your question about the material, I mean, how you can actually build something up depends on the material. I don't like to carve things out of trees. It's like dealing with a corpse. It's like a dead thing. But I like very much this plywood because I can build it up, and when necessary I can take it down and change form. Even it's very, very fluid. So it's very, very possible to work like a drawing in a sense. So that's, I find, very, very useful. And with that, I don't have a fixed idea. I can keep changing until I suddenly find, well, this is something exciting or interesting. But the material really, on some level, I mean, bronze is a fantastic material because it's very fluid when it's molten. Steel is very strong, but not very fluid. So you end up with not very complicated forms in steel. So I've been making work that I carve first of all in polyurethane and then cast later in steel, because it gives it a sort of more organic, almost lyrical poise, whatever, you know. So every material is a kind of is a little bit. I see them a little bit like the instruments in an orchestra, because you know what the melody is. But you can play the melody on a piano, but you can also play it on the violin. So the main point is actually the form, what you end up with. I know, obviously the material has a big effect, but it's a more sort of subordinated rule, I have to feel.
Is it the material itself that defines the boundaries of the form, or is it the idea itself?
There are no ideas. It'll be the material. The material is everything. For me, material is love, it's emotion, it's intelligence. I look at the material side of all the things we know. I know for people that say it's a spirit, that's a difficult concept for them, but for me, the material is so sublimely complicated and sublime that we don't really realize how complicated it is. The reality we live in is just a tiny little, it's just one possibility of billions and endless possibilities of form. So the material is really, and I mean it seriously when I say, even emotions have a material basis. We know exactly what materials in our body we produce to make certain responses to the world. We know about intelligence is also dealing with the most complicated material in the world. It's the human neuron. This thing that enables us to realize that we have an existence and we live in a material. So the material is something incredibly sublime, wonderful. And so as a sculptor, of course, that's what ideas is something else. There are so many ideas one could have, but good ideas invariably don't make good art. They can, but it's not really all this thing, thinking something up and then you make it, that's not really the point. Art making should be I don't want to dictate it for other people, but for me, art making should be an experience.
In the Mask series, you create new relationships between the body and the space by replicating the profiles of the human face. What inspired this series?
Okay, so this is a strange story because we have a theatre in Wuppertal, the town I live in, and the director of the theatre, he asked me they had a place which had an old sculpture in it they took down, and they asked me to make a sculpture for that place. And I thought, okay, well, very nice, I do that for them. But when I started to do it, I had this idea of the Janus masks, the theatre masks, and I wanted to sort of blend their characters in one another. And I then, when I was finished, I was quite happy with the result. It was a smaller sculpture. And I asked the theatre director to come and have a look, and he came through the studio. He said, oh, wonderful, oh, wonderful. And then I said, yes, this is the work I'm thinking of making. He said, oh, really? So we didn't make that sculpture. But I was left with this kind of idea of morphology characteristics. And so the masks, sorry?
Thanks to God.
Yes, thank you. So I was very thankful for the input, the impulse, but I've had to go my own way on it.
Yeah, great sculptures.
Yes, they've been very delightful and rich territory to explore, definitely.
In the Industrial Nature series, you establish a permeable relationship between the organic rhythms of nature and industrial forms. In your opinion, is conflict or harmony more dominant in this relationship?
Well, the problem for me is that as a species, we're responsible for an impoverishment of form on the planet. Nature is ultimately complicated and has lots of meanings and has had billions of years to develop itself. But it's astounding that we can make anything at all, I accept that. But what we do, it's simple geometries, straight lines, flat surfaces, squares, circles, very, very repetitive and very, very boring on some level. And I feel that one can actually work in a way to improve. And I'm not just talking here about the buildings we see. It's not just a comment on architecture, but it is also a comment on our school systems. It's also on our social systems. It's the way we think and the way we act. It's not really very individual. It's all very, very formatted and precise. And it really is, not at all very interesting. And art is really the only thing that is always finding new forms. And so that's really, I don't want to give sculpture a role, but it is a function that sculpture has. We discover new forms. This produces new ideas, new emotions, and new terms and new perspectives. And I think and freedoms. And I think that's very important.
It is stated that you were inspired by geological erosion process.
Geological, yeah. Yes.
In your sculpture cast. What conceptual meaning does the effect of time on the material hold for you?
Fundamentally, I mean, historically one thinks that sculpture is something static. And I really don't like it when people say, I like your statues. And I think, statues, there's the idea of them being standing. And the fact of the matter is that sculpture in the last 130 years has developed enormously. Not just Tony Cragg, but women sculptors, men sculptors, they've looked at every corner of the world. Sometimes it's been the classical materials, it's been blood, it's been brain, it's been nature, it's been everything you can possibly imagine. And they discover and research the meaning of the materials in the world around us. Not in the way, of course, that a scientist does that. You know, scientists are interested in the basic laws of the reality we live in. No, but we try to find the meaning of materials. What is the value of a form to us? What is the value of a specific material to us? So I think that is really what artists are occupied to doing. I tell you amazing, you know, scientific facts, like there is no such thing as time, and the universe is just one of endless numbers of multiverses. Well, you didn't react very strongly, did you? But I mean, you see, but you can just sometimes look at somebody you're having a relationship with, or look at a landscape, and you have emotions and you have ideas. This is really, science is important to us because it dictates our lives nowadays. But science without art is meaningless. Yeah, you have to think about it. Who was first on the moon? Artists, a writer. Who first was doing transference of materials? Artists. Who was doing the kind of digital process we're talking about now with artificial intelligence? This is all ideas and all concepts that artists came up with long before they became a scientific or the technological reality. Internal operations of medicine, all these things have been previewed in some way or another by creative souls.
The relationship between the man-made world and the nature is central to your practice. What attracts and influences you about this contrast?
Well, again, it is a question of, you know, being a human being is something we just can't grasp. The idea that initially the planet was just dust and material, dead material, and then it formed more complicated molecules, and then it formed organic molecules, and then it formed living molecules, and then it formed thinking molecules. This is just an incredible material development, and that is really what human beings celebrate. So, you know, when we just think about our relationship to nature, that sounds very glib, sounds very simple. No, but the true relationship to nature is something we can't grasp.
Do you think the boundary between the artificial and the nature is increasingly blurred today? How is this reflected in your art?
Well, I can't say it's reflected in my art, but it is an appeal, as I've said already, it is an appeal for more creativity in the form of the materials we use. You know, I mean, look at the reality we live in. If you know and aware of the fact that the material affects you, you know, you can just look at somebody and you have a strong emotional response to everything you look at, you know? You can look at the landscape, you have a strong emotional response. Look at the cities we live in. Concrete, flat, geometric, boring. I mean, it's, so how does this affect people's emotional makeup, you know, I mean, their mentalities? So obviously it's something that one should be very, very concerned with.
What influences your motivation to sculpt today the most? What still surprises you and makes you wonder?
Well, to answer that question, I can only say I'm in a constant state of wonderment. I am. Because just to have an existence just seems like a miracle to me. I mean, the idea I'm here, sitting here in a conversation, is just so unreal in a sense. And we know that the possibilities of reality are limitless. But we ended up in this fantastically self-reflecting situation. It's whether I'm happy or unhappy, it doesn't make any difference really about that. But one can't just get away from the fact that one is in a constant state of astonishment and wonderment at having an existence.
Thank you so much. Would you like to add something?
I think I'll try to add to it in the form that I will make new sculptures for the future.
Great.
Well, we'll see if that works out.
Do you search for new geological forms in the world? Do you travel?
No, but I don't search for them, but they don't have to be, you can go to the Grand Canyon, you see all these fantastic things. But that's not really, in the most simple of situations, you can feel and see the incredible forms around us.
Have you ever been to Cappadocia?
No, but we all know. I think that would be no, I haven't done that, but maybe one day, yes. Yeah.
Thank you.
My traveling adventures are much more in the studio than in the real space.
Thank you for everything.
My pleasure. Thank you very much. Thank you.